Hello everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all the day after Passover. I hope you all had a great Passover. And of course I welcome the web audience, wherever you may be, whether it's Wednesday night or Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning or Thursday afternoon. One thing is clear, that the sun is shining somewhere on earth right now. So no matter how dark it is, somewhere there's a sun. And another thing that I can rest assured is that the sun will also come to where it's dark. So that's good news. And I hope everyone had a transcendent and meaningful Passover. And I got very good comments and feedback from our last workshop I did here, the 15 steps of the Seder. It was helpful to many, many people. It was also helpful to me and my Seders. But the challenge now is the difficult one. The most difficult. It's relatively easy to run an inspiring Seder, even though I know for most people Seders are not inspiring, but if you know what you're doing and you know the inside story, a Seder can be a very meaningful and a very psychological and growthful experience. The big challenge is what happens the morning after the hangover, the title of this class, and dedicated spirit, same spirit. Happy birthday to the neshama, to the neshama and body of Mark's dear mother, Asya Bat Sarah, the 25th of Nisan. So happy birthday to her. She should have many healthy, good years, and she and your father should very soon dance at your wedding and celebrate their grandchildren. That's with that. So it's dedicated by our dear friend Mark. Happy birthday to his dear mother. And that spirit, the discussion here is after the hangover, post-Passover challenges. So really the question is a larger one, not just around Passover, but also about Passover, and that is, how do you maintain the high? How do you retain the magic? And this is a question that has plagued thinkers and philosophers and simple people and all people from the beginning of time. Can life be one long, exciting journey? Or do we have to relegate and compartmentalize our lives to moments of escape, of freedom, of excitement, and then gravitate right back to our tedious, monotonous lives? Thoreau put it that that most people live a life of quiet desperation. And that, of course, implies that life is not exciting. And because of the desperation, and at the same time the need for relief, for some form of relief or release, some form of getting away from the grind, we human beings, as opposed to animals who experience animal bliss, seek out different ways. From the beginning of time, we seek different ways to entertain ourselves, to wake up some type of enthusiasm. And sometimes we do it in a healthy way, and very often, more often than not, unhealthy ways. Because when you're desperate and you're hungry and thirsty, whatever water comes your way, you're going to drink, even if it's not healthy water. So the big question is a holiday, is a spiritual high something that is a compartmentalized experience, or something that can actually be part of your life? And of course, in a way, I guess it's a setup, but obviously what I'm leading to is saying that when you learn the tools, you can live a life where every morning you wake up excited, enthusiastic to take on the new day. So the question is how. As I said, it's very appropriate, being that we're coming from a holiday, and hopefully if Passover was an inspirational experience, then this question is very, very, very obvious. And even if it wasn't, it's still an important question, because all of us are constantly looking for ways to find relief from the routines of our lives. So that's the theme of this discussion here. And hopefully I will try to demonstrate, to show how each of us have resources that we may not even be aware of, and probably not aware of, energetic resources that are bubbling beneath the surface and waiting to be released. Today we are aware, due to modern science, the fact that under the surface of the earth are forces at work. There are the clashing forces of the different crusts, the different tectonic plates, that when they come crashing and after a while are the root of earthquakes. We have the molten lava deep beneath the earth's surface that is bubbling, and deeply, very high temperatures. The center of the earth is like the sun, basically full of energy and light and power. And when that erupts, we have volcanoes. And of course, with modern technology, we know today that the world is not an inanimate place. Everything is brimming with energy, subatomic energy, nuclear energy. So when you look at the surface, you don't see any of it. But when we learn to tap and generate electricity, as we all know, electricity existed long before we learned to tap into it. And the same thing with the other forces of nature, gravity, forces of gravity, of electromagnetism, the strong nuclear force, the weak force, the four different forces of energy, and all forms of energy. So if you think in terms of microcosm, macrocosm, if the earth, which is not a human entity, doesn't have the soul as we human beings have, and the entire solar system has so much energy beneath the surface, how can we not imagine then that we ourselves maybe have the same type of burning lava that is waiting to erupt within ourselves? Now when I say erupt, obviously we're talking about a healthy eruption as opposed to a destructive one. And that's also part of the discussion. So the mystics make it very clear that beneath each of us, beneath the shell of our bodies, within the layers of our spirits and souls, there's enormous, enormous amounts of energy and power. And most of our lives, 90% or more of it, remains dormant or remains unaccessed. And when something does excite you, something does stimulate and arouse you, it's not like something from outside that stimulation, the catalyst may come from outside, but it's stimulating the forces within you. When a person, for example, falls in love or experiences any type of other strong force that really gives you something to live for, to fight for, to die for, to believe in, it's a resonating experience. It's not like someone hired you to be passionate. It's not like somebody imposes it upon you. Something triggers a force within you that suddenly comes alive. And I don't think it needs to be proven. Everyone knows what I'm talking about because that's what happened. Even on the most basic level, if it's a song, if it's a sight of nature, if it's a person that you love. Any of these experiences are perhaps external in the sense that they're happening outside of you, but they're stimulating and awakening something within you. So clearly we have within us, even before that moment, that type of power. But we don't recognize it. So sometimes it takes standing in front of an awesome sight of nature, and then something wakes up, and then you realize I have that within me. Where was it before? And where is it right now? And does it really die when you leave that experience? So clearly, the challenge here is not really of whether you can hold on to the high. The question is, it's always there. How do you take hold? How do you access it when it's really there all the time beneath the surface? So very similar, like what science has done, develop tools to pierce the surface of the material world and access electricity or other forms of energy. Like, when you just think the next time you're on a cell phone or texting or on the internet, what we're doing is you're essentially accessing a force that is invisible to the naked eye. And we've built equipment that learns how to enter that type of inner space and make it do wonders in our lives. So just as science has done that, the challenge is how do we do that on a personal level? Imagine if we were able to do the same equivalent to ourselves, to access all those, the inner wiring of our souls and all the energy that is brewing within us, and we had different circuits, different pipes, different channels that were bringing it to the surface. So then we too would be alive all the time. So the real challenge, of course, and the real question then is there's a cutoff. There's a cutoff between the inner and the outer, basically. So the inner, our insides are filled with energy, filled with excitement. If you were able to access it, you dance and sing all the time. But our outer lives don't quite have access to that part of that inner sense of self. So like we look at, let's say, the sea, the cover of the sea. You know, yesterday was the last day of Passover. The theme of it is very much the final redemption. You read the Haftarah of Isaiah about a world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. The day before was the 7th of Passover, which celebrated the parting of the sea. Parting of the sea, which is essentially that when the Jews left Egypt, 7 days later, they stood before a sea which parted before them. And the mystics explain the significance of this miracle is to show us that beneath the sea of life, both the physical sea and also the spiritual sea, beneath the surface of our own lives, there's an enormous amount of life and power. You know, if we never dived beneath the sea, there were no cameras, no one would have a clue what the world, the undersea world looks like. You know, you may speculate that there's maybe a few fish, because you see them jumping out from time to time. A whale, no one really would know how big a whale is because you don't see the full whale. We know there's some life underneath, but no one would ever imagine there's life as we know it. The Talmud says that everything that exists on land exists in the sea. It's interesting. It doesn't say everything that exists in the sea exists on land, because the sea has more species and more life and more mountains and more ranges and valleys and volcanoes and earthquakes than anything on land, because 2/3 of the earth is sea. So imagine that. So it's just at least 2/3. The earth is 1/3 is land, 2/3 is sea, water. So whatever's happening on land is at least double in the sea. In addition to the fact it's an entirely different world, a mysterious world. So the sea cover, in a sense, is a metaphor for life itself. It conceals a whole world, a universe, to the point that we still don't have, in fact, conquered all the mysteries of the sea. We may know more secrets about outer space than we do about just a few miles away from us. Because the depths of the sea nobody's ever gone to. Some places are impossible to reach, at least with the equipment that we have today. New species are being discovered all the time, especially in the darkest crevices, in the lowest part of the ocean, where they once thought it was impossible for life to survive because of the pressure, or because of the darkness, because of the gas, the toxins and stuff like that. But life is everywhere. So if without even getting into what type of life, that alone is a message that tells us we have no clue what's going on beneath the surface. That's an immediate lesson that you have from the sea. And we have the same lesson, obviously, from technology. What's going on in the subatomic world. What's going on in our own unconscious, therefore, should not surprise you that it's full of life. So once in history, God said, let's part the sea. Let us show the human race what potential is they're possible of, they're capable of. Now, just like the sea, when you look at the cover, you can't have any clue what's going on within it. The same is in our lives. There's a whole series of events, there's a whole complex systems, infrastructures that we usually don't access. And that's the first thing one must know, is that it exists. Because if you don't know it exists, you're definitely not going to access it. Once you know it exists, now comes the time to begin to reach it. Like, when they asked why you climb Mount Everest, because it's there. If it wasn't there, nobody would climb it. So the fact is, once you know there's such depths, it should motivate us. It's about you. Imagine you could spend all your life exploring all kinds of things and not even getting to know yourself. So simply on a selfish level, it will be quite interesting. If that's true, that I'm ready to go and explore other parts of the world and travel around the world to see exotic nature or exotic cultures and communities and so on, what about traveling inside yourself? There's also plenty of exotic, and maybe more than anywhere out there. And it's also about you, which means the thing that you carry around your whole life is your body and your soul. So the first thing is to know it's there. And then Once it's there, and knowing there's such depths, then of course the question is, okay, how do I access it? How do I discover what's there? How do I tap into it? But that's a critical component, and I can tell you right now that this is one of the biggest challenges to convince people that it's there. You see, the reason it's hard to embrace it is because, not because we don't believe it, because we are so consumed and so overwhelmed and submerged in our outer lives, which means on the sea cover level, that even if we know there's something beneath it, we just don't have the time and the energy. And busy at work, financial pressures, personal pressures, whatever the list of items that you would list that would tell you what are the things you're facing right now, what challenges. Most people would usually list one of the few things I'm going to mention now: financial concerns, anxieties, health issues, family issues, parents, your own psychological fears, issues about finding a relationship that will endure, or being in a relationship that's complicated and draining you. These are, what I just said, the usual suspects. I can list a few more that are probably more unique to each of us, but most of us will have one of the few items I just mentioned, if not all of them. Psychological fears I mentioned. Anyone want to add anything to this list? Anybody that's an expert on the usual suspects? But you'll get the idea. You could add a few items here and there. But the point I'm making is that these forces are so powerful, they keep you floating on top of the sea cover. When do you have time to go for exploration, start looking on what's going on beneath the surface? I can speak for myself, just on I'm not even getting on a psychological level. I'm not going to do confession here. But really from a work level. I had this organization called the Meaningful Life Center, doing all kinds of things. Biggest challenge is being spread thin, prioritizing. Because everything you do is a good thing, and then the new ideas come up. And now Mark is submitting to me a whole new series of ideas. So, and they're all exciting, and some should be explored immediately. But when you're running, when you're on a marathon, running 90 miles an hour, it's very difficult to tinker with a machine, because you're already in movement. It's one thing, before you begin, you're starting a new company, you start a new non-profit organization. You're not doing anything yet, so it's all you plan it out. Even though, I don't know, you can't do anything, but at least you plan it out before you begin. But once you're running, like that, the joke of the guy that, the cardiologist that brings his automobile to the mechanic, and they have this conversation between them, and the mechanic says, mechanic says, let me ask you something. How much you get paid an hour? So, let him go calculate. A cardiologist, it's a good thousands and thousands of dollars an hour. Maybe $10,000 an hour and perform surgery. They can get $50,000, $60,000 for one heart surgery. And he says, can you explain this to me? We both do the same thing. You are, fixing bodies, and I'm fixing cars. So why is it that I get $100 an hour, $150 an hour, $50, whatever it is, $75 an hour? It's not in the same league even. And you get these thousands and thousands of dollars an hour. So the cardiologist responded, well, try fixing my car while it's driving 90 miles an hour. And then you'll see why. I don't know if that's a justification, but it's an interesting parallel because it's true. How can you fix a car? When it's stationary, you can fix things. But when you're running in the rat race and you're already involved, even in great things, let alone challenging things that, as I said, the fears and the responsibilities and anxieties, it's extremely difficult, no matter how sensible it may be, to enter inward and rewire things. Because first of all, you start rewiring, and then it starts disturbing the surface, what you're involved in. You can't suddenly stop all your whole life. Or so we think. Maybe we could. Maybe we convince ourselves we can't, because God forbid we see when in times of emergency we suddenly do stop everything, right? When it's forced upon us. So that's another question. But at least psychologically, most of us think we can't stop. If you stop, if you didn't receive text one day, most of us think it would be, we'd completely collapse and self-annihilate, right? Some people for 5 minutes think that way. Excuse me. Give me a tissue. Anyway, so The sneeze was not part of the presentation. Even though maybe it's a sign that I may have crossed the line. Thank you. This is live TV, so I have to connect it all. So pointing out the problem, as I always point out here, is that have the cure of an illness is awareness. And just as I said before, step one is to know that you have this potential, this enormous potency and potential within you. Number two is to know how difficult it is to access, even though you're completely aware of it. Which really shows you how bizarre life is. Right here, sitting here, all of us can be aware, can be made aware of unbelievable depths of power you have, but simply because you are enslaved by your daily routines, you can't access it. That would be like, the child that his nose is squeezed against the glass of the chocolate candy shop, can see everything, but they can't get in. Can't get in because your life controls you. So that just shows you how contradictory and paradoxical life can be. But knowing these two things, one, the positive, that you have it within you, and number two, the negative, that your life routines trap you because you're already going, whether it's 80 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour, 10 miles, it doesn't really matter the speed. But the bottom line is you are a machine in motion, makes it so challenging and so difficult. So the only question is, so how do we counter that? And how can we, where's their hope? So just let me add one more point before I get into the solution, so to speak. And that is, this explains the reason why very often, more often than not, it is pain, suffering, and a crack in our lives that creates an opportunity. Because you see, when things are going well, quote unquote well, when I say well, I mean on our terms, we think it's going well. So then the machine is rolling. Yes, you may be convinced that there's a lot more within you, but you're maneuvering. Why would you suddenly stop the machine from rolling? But when things crack and suddenly it's not working, you have a breakdown, then you're forced to not be going 90 miles an hour. This can be on any level. It can be a health thing. It can be a psychological thing. It can be financial. That's when suddenly the cracks open. And the cracks open, you're forced to go inward because you have two options. You get either so demoralized and broken and nobody wants to just lay down and die. Or option two is you dig deeper and suddenly you realize there are other options in your life. You see this all the time. You see people go into a business, it's going well, and then a crisis strikes. So of course nobody wants the crisis, and I'm not even suggesting it's a blessing necessarily. Maybe a blessing in disguise. And then suddenly you realize that that crisis can actually be a blessing because it opens you up to look at your whole life and realize, one second, maybe it's different opportunities. And you'll see people who are driven to grow never see a failure as failure. They see it as a stepping stone. At the time you may not see it, and at that time you may completely not welcome it. But in context, and especially if you have experience, they tell the story, I don't know the exact number, but it was IBM, a new executive vice president or a serious person in a leadership position was hired, and he made a real blunder that caused the company, this is I think in the 70s, I'm talking about a very serious amount of money, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, which is no one sneezes at that type of number. And it was a mistake directly associated to him. And he was of course called in by the leaders of the company, and he was sure he was going to get the axe, and not only that, based on his contractual agreements, he was also going to get plenty liability because of it, because they built in. Instead, he was given a raise and an extension of his contract, and he was told by his superior, I forgot his name, but it's a story you can verify on Google, Mr. Google, the wise Google, that he was told this is this is a few $100 million investment in your success. In other words, they saw his mistake, they realized his potential. He clearly had a lot of strengths, And they were ready to absorb such a loss because what he learned from that to them was worth more than the loss. Now, of course, this comes with people who are very seasoned and understand experience and as a result, yes, what happened in time was they made the company a lot more than that, billions, the same man. And I think they could have easily fired him, and it was, it's a serious loss of money. But when you think big, and obviously if you have deep pockets as well, and you can absorb such a loss, it doesn't hurt. But it wasn't just that, because it's still a serious loss, and you could easily just move on and forget about it. But that gave him that type of power. He was able to pick himself up. And this is true. You'll find all success stories that we're so enamored with, in most cases, began with a few bankruptcies that we don't know about. And you start reading, you start discovering it. And failures and losses, and sometimes failures actually that people died with, but they laid the ground for someone else to come now and build something out of what they had discovered. Now, obviously, the big question is, not every failure turns into success. So how do you know which one it is? But one thing is for sure, there's no success without some failure in somewhere in there. So let's put it this way. Every success needs failure. It doesn't mean every failure turns into success. So, but at the same time, every failure can be a lesson. Whether it turns into massive success that you can write a case study about, that's another story. But every failure can be a major lesson. There's no such thing as a failure that is pure dead end. And if you need the best proof of it, just look at the Jewish people themselves, the story of Exodus, the story of Egypt, and our being here today. There were plenty of failures. There have been plenty of near deaths, or near extinction, actually, more than near deaths. And yet, certain resilience, a certain drive, and you learn from the mistakes, and you pick up, and you grow, and you continue. So I just wanted to add that third point, in addition to the awareness of knowing that we have these depths. Number two, that we're really enslaved, our mentality, by our here and now, that the reason that most times we get open to new horizons is because our existing reality is pierced. In a way, like the parting of the sea. If the sea is forced open, and your comfort zone on the surface level of the sea is no longer comfortable, you're forced to look underneath. And then you suddenly see a whole new world emerges. So nobody wishes for it, and nobody asks for it, but it happens. This is the main reason. So the question, of course, then is it possible for us to tear open the surface without pain? Does it have to come with loss and failure? Not that it's up to us, because we're going to have our setbacks. Everyone will have them. But we're talking about the times when there's no setback. Is there a way to dig deeper and find those resources? So to go back to the initial theme, before I get into, as I said, the solution, the bottom line is this, that if you could access it, beyond the challenges I mentioned, that is the secret to perpetual transcendence. That's the secret to be a perpetually happy person who every day is exciting. So no one should ever say, I can't. You could say, I don't know how to do it. You could say, I'm too trapped on my surface level. But we cannot say that if we were accessing that level, we wouldn't have that type of life. So, as I said, it's important to know that it's doable and to know what impediments block us from getting there. And then the logic concludes very simple, as I said before, with the different forces under the crust of the earth or under the crust of all matter lies enormous amount of energy. You don't need faith for that. Today, this is a proven fact. So the question is, how do we access it? Now, there are two things that we know access nuclear energy, for example. Using that example. One is pressure and one is heat. Those are the two things. That's why you'll see, for it to be able to manipulate or maneuver with subatomic particles, you either need to speed them up, accelerate them to very, very high speeds, and that's done with a lot of pressure, or you need to heat them up, which is another way of accelerating them. These are the two ways. Intense pressure, intense heat. Now, intense pressure fits into the category I said before. Intense pressure goes into the category of being broken. Like we call nuclear fusion, nuclear fission. So fusion, let's not talk about fusion for a moment. Let's talk about fission, the splitting of the atom. Splitting of the atom is not a metaphorical thing. It's actually done. It's not split as we crack open a nut, because it's not that visible. But the splitting of the atom is through high speeds or what today it's in the news with the tsunami generated the meltdown of the nuclear reactors in Japan. You hear about what exactly nuclear energy. Most of us don't have no clue. And I think even scientists don't really have a clue. They just know it works, and they've mastered the tools of how it makes it work. But there are metal ores like uranium and others that we know that have the power to force through pressure and heat, force an atom to crack an atom, to split an atom. That can release enormous energy, but it also can release enormous havoc. God forbid, we talk about radioactive power, radioactive particles can also split cells in the human body, which is why cancer, what we call yenemachla, and other diseases of that nature that on a microscopic level are a result of anything that tries to tamper with the internal workings on this microscopic level. So it has great power, but it also has great destruction it can create. That's why it needs to be contained, cooled. You hear about the meltdown. What's the meltdown? They need a lot of water to cool it because the heat is so enormous. That's what's cracking open, so to speak, splitting the atoms that create this nuclear energy. Except in a good, healthy nuclear reactor, it's being channeled, it's being contained, and all we get are the benefits of the energy. To use a very simple example of it would be fire. Fire is necessary for life. We cannot exist without the heat and warmth of fire. Start with the sun itself. But the sun itself is a burning furnace. Nobody can live in the sun. But nobody can live without the sun. If the sun were just a few hundred miles closer or a few hundred miles farther from the earth, life would cease to exist. A few thousand miles, it would be immediate. A few hundred miles, probably with some time. So it's a precise place where it warms the earth and doesn't freeze it. If it was a little further away, earth would freeze and life would not be able to exist. If it was too close, we would burn up. And I'm not just talking about the sun's distance. Obviously, it includes the atmospheres and all the different shields and so on that allow the sun's rays to enter this earth. But there's a certain precise position and so on. Same thing with fire. We need warmth in our bodies. What is it? The temperature, Fahrenheit, 97.6? No? 98.6. Okay, but who's counting? Right. So whatever, that's the exact temperature. It gets a little lower, too lower or too higher is dangerous. The body needs warmth. Our homes need warmth for the same reason. On the other hand, if we have too much warmth, it gets too high, we burn up. So just a small, simple physical example how energy, when it's released, has great power, but also has to be monitored, has to be channeled properly. So to get back to how power is accessed is through pressure and through heat. So what is the equivalent of pressure and heat in our psychological lives? Now, one form of pressure I mentioned is suffering, a breakdown. Something breaks in our lives, something, a loss, a trauma, a crisis. It definitely creates pressure. Because before the crisis, before the trauma, you were just cruising along. Suddenly something shakes you up, and it's not that, and you're out of your league or you're out of your element, and you start wondering what to do now. Especially if it's a very traumatic experience, it can be extremely disturbing. It shakes up the whole, so it puts a lot of pressure on you. But there's other forms of pressure, as I will discuss now, that also release energy that are not necessarily associated with negative experiences. And the same thing with heat. Heat can be a negative form of heat. For example, you did something wrong and they turn the heat up on you, so to speak. Or you're hot under the collar, to use some metaphors. In other words, it's a heat based on guilt or criminal action or something, and too hot in the kitchen, they say. Get out if you can't take the heat. But there's also heat that's positive. So the key thing here is to use these tools that we've discovered in science that accesses inner energy. If you want to create excitement in your life, you want to maintain an inspiration, you have to be able to use a positive and a form of pressure and a positive form of heat. That's the key solutions. It still doesn't necessarily answer the problem that I mentioned before, which is the inertia of our lives, and that we are trapped in the routines and enslaved by those routines. But it begins to give us tools to counter that. So that's what I'm going to address now, those tools and how we actually can apply them in our lives. The pressure and the heat in a positive fashion. So, for example, when a holiday comes, like a holiday of Passover, and if it's experienced properly, not by rote and mechanically in the same old routine, so a holiday has the power, just like a Shabbat has the power, that it can bring us to another place. Just like going to a musical event, or just like a romantic experience, or traveling in nature, a beautiful part of nature, these experiences can transport you to another time and place. But as I said at the outset here, the challenge is after the hangover. What happens afterwards? How do you access it when you don't have somebody pulling you there, or you don't have an event, or you don't have music that's lifting you there? You have no external forces. How do you... So here's where that pressure and that heat come into play. So let me share with you an interesting letter, which is also like a metaphor, which comes from the Rebbe. There's a principle taught by the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, that everything that we see in here is a lesson for us in our lives, based on the principle of divine providence, which means there are no accidents. All of you here right now, everyone listening, myself sitting here, has many different forces that brought us here together. We may or may not understand them all. In most cases, we don't understand them all. But it's a God that leads the footsteps of a person. So the work we do and the job we have and the place and opportunities and people that we know and so on are all there for a purpose. It's like a deeper inside story, a choreography that is hidden from the surface level. This you'll see is critical to point number 2 I made before about the 90 mile an hour when you're ready in it. So there's this letter that was written by the Rebbe to a person who owned dry cleaners or laundromats. I'm not sure which one, but something of that. And he writes to him that everything is divine providence, including the job you have. Now you think in a mundane type of activity like running dry cleaners, what divine lesson can one learn from that? And here's what the Rebbe writes to him. Writes to him like this, that what is the innovation of dry cleaning or any type of cleaning clothing? You buy a new pair of clothes, you wear it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, as many times. At some point it begins to soil, wrinkle, get dirty. At some point you can't wear it any longer if you want to be presentable. So in the old days, the only choice was you threw it out. What else could you do? Or you just wore rags until it was impossible to wear any longer. What is the concept of dry cleaning? Or is that you bring these clothes to a cleaner's. This was this guy's job. And for a certain small fee, he takes the clothing, he submerges it in water, and not just plain water, cold water, warm, washes it out, mixes it with certain chemicals that are proven to be able to get rid of stains and different things that have been embedded inside the garments that you can't just easily wash off. And then take it out of the wash, the chemicals and so on. You dry it, put it under a very heavy press. And that press, the pressure of the press, irons the clothing back to its original shape. And you can wear it again, fresh. And this process can be repeated many times until at some point, obviously nothing lasts forever. Every garment can ultimately runs thin and so on. What's the lesson in life? It goes like this. Neshama she'nasata bi taharahi. Every morning in the prayer we say that each of our souls that you've given me, we say to God, is pure. Every morning. So we're born with a pure soul, unsoiled, unwrinkled, unaffected by life's challenges. And then the soul begins to go through the wear and tear of life in the body, and it begins to experience disappointments and losses and abuse, different pains, the different things that ultimately affect our lives. in our childhood, as we grow older. So you think that your soul at some point becomes like a tattered garment, all soiled, mistakes are made, and the soul is no longer pure as it was when you were first born, freshly fallen snow. So the cleaning idea comes to teach us, no, it's not the case. If you take the soul, person's life, and you submerge it in water, and water, as he puts it, ein mayim ela Torah. Water is connected to knowledge, Torah knowledge, spiritual knowledge. And not just plain water, cold water. Warm water. Warmth is a sign of love. Warm is nurturing. Cold water, you could have knowledge, but it's very detached. It's very lifeless. Warm water. And you mix chemicals into it. The chemicals represent different mitzvahs. Whether it's charity or other good deeds that we do. And you wash out the soul through these activities. And then you put the soul under serious pressure, like an iron, like you would put a garment under the pressure of an iron, heavy pressure. It's called Kabbalah soil. The pressure that the soul has to perform, has to answer to a higher authority, has a higher calling to live up to, then the soul can go through a regeneration, a regenerative process of being refreshed as if it's new and fresh, like a newly ironed garment, clean garment. That was the message. Okay? So you see here both things. You see here heat, you see pressure. And of course also the water. That there are things we can do that allow us to access inner energy in our lives. So it's true, on the outer level, pains of life and the wear and tear of life, as I mentioned, the fact is it does affect us. There's no one that's immune to it. People who are not affected by it are not because they haven't had pains. It's because they have something to access that's deeper, that counters the wear and tear. Just like in this case here with the laundromat, that there's something that allows you to go deeper and access that transcends the wear and tear. There are people who came through the Holocaust, who were broken and destroyed, and others experienced the same losses, and the same deaths, and the same inhumanities, and yet we're able to access deeper strength. Dr. Viktor Frankl documents this in his own logotherapy, Man in Search of Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor himself, secular Jew, but he witnessed, as he writes, those that had faith. And he said there's no question, because they had meaning in life. It's not that they had answers to the pain and suffering they endured. They had something to hold on to. What simply means there's something deeper that they could access that countered the challenges. So when, as I mentioned very often in this class, there are trees in the forest when a storm strikes, thunderstorm strikes, as the forecast states there will be tonight and tomorrow. Not that I believe in forecasts. Some people have blind faith in these forecasts. In New York, it's notoriously known that whenever they predict heavy snow, it usually doesn't snow. When they don't predict it, there's a big major blizzard. Not always, but it's often the case. So you see when a storm strikes, some trees fall, some don't. It's not some type of random punishment. Which trees last? The ones that have deep roots, the ones that have resilience, that have flexibility. Same thing with a ship at sea. So when things are calm, as I said, then the surface of the ocean is calm, you can't tell the difference between one boat and the next. You can't tell the difference what's strong and what's not strong, because everything is floating properly. When the storm strikes, suddenly the cracks emerge. And then you see who has deep roots and who doesn't. Who has the sturdiness, who can dig deeper, who has those foundations. So Viktor Frankl says as much as in the Man in Search of Meaning, that meaning that people have in their lives. But before the Holocaust, you can't get it while the storm strikes. Middle of the storm, you suddenly can't go shopping for meaning. So before it strikes, you have that depth, that when it does, you have something to turn to. Very similar to what they call in investment diversification, but here it's not on a quantity level, it's on a qualitative level, where you have other eggs in other baskets to turn to when one basket is taken from you for whatever reason. So the idea of accessing that type of deeper energy requires a person to be able to find themselves, as I said, like in this story, this letter, through both heat and pressure. So what's the heat? Well, let's start with the pressure first. What's the pressure? Even though the order there is different, what's the pressure? The pressure is, healthy pressure, is, in Hebrew there's a word called kabbalat al. It means, let's translate it literally, it means to accept the yoke. Kabbalat al malchut shamayim, to accept the yoke of God's sovereignty over your life. In 12-step programs, they have a similar line, where I've lost control over my life, so the only thing I can turn to is surrender to a higher power. In this case, Kabbalat al malchut shamayim, which relates to Shema, you don't have to lose control to access it. Even if you have control, you access it. So in the 12 steps, there you're talking to people who had to hit rock bottom to learn that message. But people who say Shema every day don't have to hit rock bottom. They say it to children even before you hit rock bottom. Or you maybe never have to because you preempt it. What is it? It's understanding that you have pressure upon you to answer to a higher authority. Now let me qualify what this means. Pressure, most of us don't like. We don't like pressure. Even though diamonds wouldn't exist without pressure. Even though excellence could not be achieved without it. Deadlines and so on. But nobody likes pressure. Even while we know that it's necessary. So when you say pressure to answer to higher authority, why don't we like it? Because it makes you accountable. Much easier to live your life without any pressure. Nobody's watching, nobody's looking, and so on. The idea that you are answerable and accountable to something higher is not pleasant initially. But when you think about it, it's the only thing that really gives life true meaning. You know, no astronaut going into outer space ever asked the question, you know, why do I have to follow every stupid little guideline that NASA wrote up in the big manual for me? To eat a certain time, eat a certain way, everything. Why? Because you know he's in an alien environment where one little mistake is life and death. And therefore you have to wear a certain uniform, and you have to wear a certain mask, and there's all kinds of dangers involved. And everything has been mapped out for you. And you could say, hey, what do you mean, where's my free will? But the reason is because he knows he's on a mission, and he knows he's on a mission in a dangerous place. If the astronaut ceases to remember that he's on a mission, yeah, then I don't have to answer to anyone. No one's watching. No one cares. I wasn't sent here. I do what I want. And if he doesn't know he's in a dangerous place, he'll do things that actually are destructive. Just an example. So let's apply this now to our lives. Were we sent here to this earth on a mission, or are we here just to hang out? Did someone send us here? Now, I'm not here to make the argument that you have to accept someone sent you, but at least know that there's consequences to both of that choice. And it's a very clear choice. You can't have it both ways. I'm not saying we're perfect just because we know we're on a mission. But you have to know which is your life. Do you believe that your soul was sent to earth, just like an astronaut was sent by an entity called NASA for a purpose? You have a mission here. And that mission entails going into dangerous territory. Kol hadrachim b'cheskes sakana. Life is filled with dangers. We don't know what tomorrow brings. You can't just live in your basement in fear that, because if you go outside, who knows what's going to happen, who you're going to encounter, what dangers are lurking. Of course there are dangers lurking. Life is full of danger. Unknowns. You know, and you see people have it all planned out and it didn't work out. So that alone can drive you, whatever plans you make, it doesn't even make a difference because things happen that are not in your control. So you can live a life which is complete hypochondria and fear of the unknown. So we live in a dangerous world, and we also live in a world that is driven by a mission, as I said. So a person has to make that choice. Do you believe that that is the case with you? Most people don't think about it much. And when they do, the concept that I was sent on a mission is pretty novel. It's appealing. But remember, it comes also with consequences. The consequences are you living up to your mission? And you're then accountable. And again, I want to make sure I'm clarifying, this is not about me preaching to you. You have to be accountable to me or to anybody. It's about you and yourself, your soul, your destiny, your God, and so on. Now, what about the other option? The other option is, no mission, And maybe life isn't so dangerous, or life is dangerous and there's no mission, however you want to combine the two. And then, basically then you do what you wish, and the pieces fall, and then we're born, we die, and we move on. Obviously, I'm here to present the argument, or not really to present the argument. What I'm saying is built on the assumption and the axiom that we are on a mission. And as such, it changes everything. But this isn't just about responsibility. There's also great benefits of knowing that. Because if you're sent on a mission, you're also sent with the tools and resources necessary to fulfill your mission, no matter how dangerous it is. Because those astronauts in space also know that someone planned it all, and they do follow the guidelines, they could fulfill their mission. So yes, there are pitfalls and risks, and there is accountability. But the upside is that your life has a meaning, that your actions and your choices will make a difference, can change the course of history. And that changes everything. Because that becomes the force that can counter any challenge. Because if you really believe that and know that, then there's nothing that can destroy you. Whereas if you have no mission, then you're completely at mercy of the elements, the whims of nature, and the whims of the dangers of the universe, and so on. So the plus side is obviously great, but it comes with a price. And as an adult, you have to know that. The price is you can't have it both ways. You cannot expect to be able to access deeper resources and not believe you have a mission. Because the mission is what gives you those resources and gives you the faith to access them. So to go back now to the pressure, that is pressure. There's pressure involved. The pressure of knowing that you were sent here. The pressure of knowing that your actions matter. And if you don't do what you have to do, the consequences. And if you do what you have to do, you can change the course of history. So we have to ask ourselves the question, does that pressure frighten us, or does it attract us? What it means, it comes down to this, that your life tomorrow has, tonight, and any moment has purpose. And that you are blessed with the opportunity to do something that no one else can do but you. That's what it comes down to. That has two sides to it. It's pressure, but it's great return. Because that gives you the roots, like in the tree example. That gives you the strength, the fortitude, that life has meaning. So no matter what happens, those roots remain with you. And that's why people who have that type of faith in their mission, nothing can really frighten them at the end of the day. It doesn't mean that life cannot be challenging. But like the classic story I always tell about that Rebbe, when the gun was pointed to his head by true enemies, equivalent of Nazis, the Soviet authorities, and they said to him, this pistol here has made many people cooperate with us. And he said, this toy can only frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. Which simply meant that he had plenty of resources. You're not going to frighten me because you didn't send me to this earth. I'm here on a mission. I have a purpose. And yes, you can take my life, but you can't take away my higher purpose. Now, not everyone is on that level that can just stand and talk to someone with a gun to their head that way. But it gives us a taste of that type of reality. Thank God we're not challenged in that fashion. But on a smaller scale, the thing that counters our monotonous routines is knowing that there's a deeper resources that you have access to because you have that mission. And that is pressure. And the interesting thing, that pressure will bring the best out of you. So, here we have the two types of pressure. There's pressure that, let's say, someone who's been addicted to something has to join the 12-step program, and they learn to accept the pressure of a higher authority. That came through negative experiences. Or someone that's healthy without having to go through any loss or any drastic traumatic experience, says Shema Yisrael every morning, several times a day. I know there's a higher force that's higher than I am, a uniting force, Hashem Echad, and I have to answer to that force, and that force gives me significance. That's a pressure. That has a lot of pressure, that statement, because it means you have a job to do, and that job is, mind you, more important than any job that you'll ever have to fulfill, because all the jobs you have that make money, that may be to make ends meet, whereas this job is whether you're going to live up to why you were sent to this earth or not. So of course, then the question, so that's pressure. Let's go to heat, and then I'll go back to the entire story here. Heat, well, unhealthy heat I mentioned. Things that burn us, that challenge us. But there's healthy heat, as in that letter, he says warm water. So in Judaism, there is the arch enemy of the Jewish people is Amalek. Amalek is deathly cold. We always associate cold with death, cold death. Death is cold, life is warm. Even psychologically, when someone says, you're cold to me, detached, very disturbing when someone who loves you is cold to you. It can be more hurtful than words, than abuse, even physically touching someone. Hitting someone is sometimes not as painful as someone who loves you, who you love, and someone you think loves you becomes cold to you. Because it's like someone sticking a dagger into your heart. You see this with children. Children, people are supposed to love them, suddenly turn cold. Very, very psychologically disturbing. It's probably one of the most destructive forces. But it's not physical. So I'm sure everybody here has had that experience. Being given the cold shoulder by someone you care about. I'm not even getting to whether who's at fault. But it's not a pleasant experience. Would you agree? Okay. So cold in that sense is associated with something that's very disturbing. So obviously warmth is the antithesis of that. What is warmth? Someone that cares about you. You feel nurtured. You feel warm. When a mother cradles her child, the child feels warm. Not just physically warm by the body of the mother or father, but also psychologically warm. You feel a closeness. Warmth is associated in that sense with love and nurturing. So in that context, cold water, like with the laundry's analogy, that's fine. Even though there are some garments actually that cold water, they say it on the garment, right? To wash it in cold water. But warm water is always, I think, somewhat a little more comfortable. I know there are. I don't know if any of you are. What are they called? Those guys that the first freeze, they go into the Coney Island with the polar bears. Are you anyone here? You're a polar bear? Really? Ah, okay. So you must be very hot-blooded. Okay. Okay, so there is that. But let me ask you, is it as energized, is it as nurturing as, I guess once you're in there, it
gives energy.
Okay.
You have no choice.
Right. There you go, pressure. Good. The truth is you won't find anyone doing that in boiling water, because that can be quite dangerous probably, right? Hey, I didn't even get it. What do you know? We have a polar bear among us. Okay, good. So I was using that as an exception because most people don't do that, out of discomfort or whatever it may be. But warm water has a certain soothing effect, even for polar bears. I agree. You take a warm shower? Okay, good. Except when you're nervous, cold shower sometimes works, they say. Like if you're very nervous, go into a cold shower, it'll shake you up. If you're in a bad mood, going to a cold shower could always help. Or intoxicated, and so on. So warm water, as we all know what warm water is, it's all warmth. Warmth is a nurturing experience. Warmth. So the positive warmth, in the case is like in the context of the laundry story, is a person can teach Torah, can learn Torah. A person can sit at a Seder and do everything right, but it's like cold like ice. It's a cold experience. Detached, mechanical, very, icy. You ever go to a party and you feel that the hosts are cold, and then of course it spills over, everybody's cold. Or you go to people who are warm. They may not do everything right, but the warmth changes the whole atmosphere. So in the context of eliciting deeper connection to someone, think of it this way. If you see somebody you care about, you want to motivate them, you can do two things, and you see them do something that is inappropriate. You can yell at them. You can tell them in harsh words, in cold terms, consequences of what they did. Or you can speak to them warmly and say, I love you deeply, and it hurts me. I'm disappointed, that you have not lived up to the potential you can live up to. And I'm not speaking now in a sermonic way, condescending. I'm talking about talking to someone that in language that they could hear you speak in that fashion. Talking about someone and they sense the love that you're exuding, and how much you expect and how much you recognize the potential they have. Which one will motivate another person? So it's obvious. It's a rhetorical question. Words from the heart enter the heart. And when you really care about someone and the words are warm, has a whole different impact. That's why in that letter about the cleaning, it wasn't just about putting the clothing or putting the neshama, the soul, in water. Water, yes, water is better than no water. Water is the source of life. But water warms water. Because warmth, in a way, think about it, even in a metaphorical way, in a physical way, it melts the surface. When someone's kind to you, generally speaking, an icy demeanor will be melted. I know it's true that at times there are people who are very cold and very detached and distant. Nothing you say, even if you're warm, it's not always going to be reciprocal. But first of all, you may not know what kind of effect you have, even if they continue to be cold. Secondly, what you have to lose. The other approach is definitely not going to work. Confrontational. And thirdly, you did what you had to do. And then the rest may be up to God. So the idea of not reciprocating when someone is cold and angry, not reciprocating with anger and coldness, there's a lot to go for it. I'm not suggesting turning the other cheek when someone insulting or someone does something to you. Maybe you have to get out of the line of fire. I'm not saying we should just embrace with love our enemies and someone who may be violent, etc. Obviously, you're not talking about that. I'm talking about situations that are more subtle than that. That there's a certain power of warmth and lovingness, which sometimes takes tremendous superhuman effort. There are people, God should protect us, that are very annoying and extremely difficult to talk to and difficult, and very hard to show kindness sometimes. And God knows I myself have been challenged in this more than once, But on the other hand, when you overcome and you're able to rise to the occasion, great things can happen. And I've seen that too. I've seen it many times. I know a couple married many years, and she they're both very fine people, but she grew up in a home where she was abandoned, basically. She was abandoned by her father, and abandonment issues are deep issues in her life. And of course, that challenged her in her own relationship with her husband. And and he happens to travel from time to time. And whenever he would travel, it was a major crisis. He would call her, of course, all the time, and he understood this issue and did not throw it in her face. He was sensitive. But he knew every time he went on a trip, which he had no choice, it was hell. Because he'd call home, trying to be kind, and she'd start yelling at him, "Where are you? You're going to leave me? Who said you're going to come back to me?" And it was irrational. It wasn't like due to a fight or due to some signal or anything that happened. It was just her natural reaction. She regressed back to her childhood, the fear of abandonment. And when a person who's an adult turns back into a child, it's not something you can just rationally dismiss. It's like a child is afraid of the boogeyman in the dark closet. You can't just say there's no one there. You need to show love and nurturing. The child should build back their security before just rationally saying, go into that closet and you'll see nothing's going to happen to you. You can't speak that way to that child. The child doesn't understand such a sense. The child, like under all of us, when we're fearful and frightened, it's not like you can just rationalize and mathematically explain that you just don't get it. It doesn't work that way. Not even for children, for adults as well. So once he calls me, I remember frantic. He was in some city, and his wife had a major tantrum. And the way his words told me was, he's ready to divorce her. This is it. He loved part of her, but he does not want to be her caretaker and babysitter. And there's absolutely no basis for her attack on him. And he was really, really, he wasn't going to divorce, but he was at that point of that anger, because they were not justified. So, as usual, I usually give counterintuitive advice. So I said to him, my advice is, since you're calling me, is I think you should call up the city where you live get the best flower shop in town, send her a bouquet of flowers or roses, whatever. I remember clearly, on the phone, I could hear him about to like faint. He said, "What? Are you making a joke or something?" Because it's one thing, I would give him advice, how to have restraint, be quiet, a little downtime until he cools off and gets over it. But here I was telling him to not just be neutral and passive, but to go right back into the lion's den and send her flowers, which is the last thing he wanted to do. But to his credit, he did it. The reason I said to him to do it, I'll tell you right away, is for two reasons, for him and for her. For her, maybe the more obvious reason, because she would never expect that. And in that type of situation, when a person reverts back to a state of mind, psychological state that is very deep embedded because of abandonment issues, shock is good. I mean, good shock. I don't mean a bad shock. Not expecting that has to trigger some switches in her. Not even immediate. Immediately she may think it's manipulative. Maybe she, whatever it is. But on time, just the idea that that was done is unexpected. Because you'd think, because her pattern would be, I yell at the guy and then he abandons me. He actually does abandon me. That's the pattern. That's what you would expect, tit for tat. But someone who you're yelling at suddenly shows you even more love, it doesn't make sense. So it has to shake up a person's psyche. And at some point it has its impact. It's not automatic and it's not going to solve all the problems, but it's definitely the healthiest approach in such a situation. Now, of course, this is predicated upon the fact that they both love each other and that there's a relationship. If it's just pure abuse and she abuses him all the time and there's no respite, that's another story. Maybe she's not ready for a relationship and there are consequences that she has to face, etc. But I'm talking about a situation where it's not every day and so on. And for him, the key thing was, and this is even a bigger point, was the transcendence. To transcend his own natural reaction. Allowed him to be a great man. And again, I would never expect that from someone if every day they have to swallow the bullet and every day behave in that way where there's only one-way street, you giving love and getting abuse in return, that's not acceptable. No relationship is that acceptable. But at times where she has this weakness, just like some people need insulin, some people need certain medication, she has this is part of her life story. It's not her fault. So understanding that and being able to get beyond it is a tremendous power. What does all this show? This is like warmth. The warmth he showed through it, even though it may have been forced, because it's not the natural reaction you would have, both warmed him up and warmed her up. Again, long term, I'm not suggesting this one-time thing changed the whole picture. But it's part of a whole dynamic. And they did address it later, and it's still challenging. I'm not suggesting it's all over, but I just wanted to give an example how sometimes a counterintuitive attitude, which is showing even more warmth to someone who's showing you the opposite. And again, not in all circumstances. This has to be judged case by case. Has extreme power to melt the surface. And when you melt the surface, all kinds of interesting forces emerge. And this man for sure has become a greater man. He's accessed energy and power inside of him that he would never have accessed. So these two things, pressure and heat, the good ones, not waiting for trauma and crisis and so on, can somewhat pierce the surface of a person's life. The idea that you have to answer to higher authority, kabbalat all, that means pressure. That you have to answer, you have someone to be accountable to. And number two, that you show love and warmth, even in situations that may not always deserve it. These forces tend to become very powerful forces that allow, as an example with a nuclear fission, allow certain energy to come out that would never come out on its own. So this brings me back to the big question, however. Okay, fine. It's very nice tools and important ones. This week's chapter, for example, talks about Avet Yisrael, V'havtarecha kamocha, loving your fellow. This is love. Love is warmth. Showing warmth to everybody. Considered to be the foundation of the entire Torah. Nothing comes close to the warmth and love that a person shows to another. No mitzvah in the Torah is comparable. But more importantly, this love contains, Klal Gadol is the fundamental principle of all of the Torah. In Hillel's words, this is the entire Torah and everything else is commentary. Don't do unto others that you don't want done unto yourself. Which in other terms, in negative terms, the positive is love everyone unconditionally. So you have that message in this week's chapter. And then the pressure that I mentioned, which is the basis of the entire Torah, is that you answer to someone. There is responsibility. We're not just here to do whatever we like, in a positive way. So then the question is, fine, how then do we get over the big challenge that I mentioned earlier? It's a given we have deeper resources, that we have unbelievable amount of potential. It's a given that through these tools, love and pressure, and warmth and pressure, we can access that. But we still have the big challenge. We're going 90 miles an hour in our lives. We have the inertia, comfort zone, surface. And hopefully we don't have a crisis that's cracking that. So this brings me back to what I said earlier about divine providence. It's true that your life has inertia, your job, your responsibilities, psychological stuff, anxieties, all the things we talked about. You know, each of us has our pathology. Everyone here has their life story that shapes you right now and will determine more or less what you're going to be doing tomorrow. And this includes even your literal calendar and daily schedule, your job, obviously, and then the friends you have and the routines, the trajectory of our lives. You know, from time to time, you break out of that trajectory. But more or less, we have our patterns. And that's a very powerful force. So here's the key thing to remember, and this is an interesting twist. Even that surface is also divine providence, is also the hand of God. If it wasn't, it would be a force that would be almost impossible to contend with because, as I said, you may be accessing all kinds of, you may be wanting to access all your inner power, and you may have all the warmth in the world and all the pressure, and you accept God's will, but the fact is I have a job. What am I supposed to do? The fact is I have these financial worries. You know, I can't just ignore them. The fact is I have psychological ghosts. So the answer is that too is divine providence. That even the surface level of your life is also choreographed. So in an interesting way, we have here is that besides the inner forces in your life that you can access, even those outer forces also have deeper meaning. So how do you make them not be an impediment is by making them be allies. Looking into the divine providence of why you have this job. Why are you blessed not to be that wealthy? So you have financial anxieties. Why were you blessed with other psychological fears? I say the word blessed not just as to be humorous, but in a way everything has its purpose. And by understanding that even those forces that are on the surface level are part of the plan, and in a way can be turned, then that allows you to turn them in a way to tools that help as tools to access that which is deeper. So that's going back to the man with the laundromat. You know, it wasn't just the lessons that your work happens to reflect some deeper cosmic lesson. How does that help him? That was what I wondered when I read the letter. Okay, fine. Suddenly his work becomes a spiritual work? The fact is he still's got to go back to the sweat room and deal with the customers, obnoxious or not, people coming back and complaining about their clothing not be cleaned. You know, the whole works of, I wouldn't envy anyone working in that type of position. It may not be the worst type of menial labor, but it's still menial labor. So just because it has a lesson in his life, how does that help? So it's true, he can tell some of his customers, by the way, hey, you know, I got such a letter from the Rebbe, and my job is very reflective of the whole cosmic picture. I mean, it has some redeeming elements, but the real question is, how does that help him day to day? I'll tell you how it helps. Because it comes to realize that his work has purpose. Besides the lesson that it deserves, there's a reason why he's doing that. And ultimately, the people he meets, even those that are maybe unpleasant and miserable customers, there's a reason for it. So it wasn't just the lesson in his work, it was lifting up the work that you do, that all work has purpose and meaning. So yes, some of us would love to be able to be just, I guess, all-day work if you're a musician in your music, or if you're a writer in your writing, to do something that's sublime, something that's spiritual, that speaks to your soul. But the fact is, life sometimes presents itself circumstances that not always are in your control. You have to make ends meet. And you can't make the money from your music. Or you can't make your money purely from your writing. I'm just using those examples because I'm a writer and Philip is a musician. Or anyone out there. I mean, you can apply this to any one of what you do. The things you love most. You'd love to do, but you can't because you don't have the time for it. Again, I'm not getting into discussion whether it's actually true that you can't. That should be looked at as well objectively. But let's assume for a moment life's challenges. You were not what's the word for it? Endowed with an inheritance of millions of dollars. You could just do it and blow the money and do whatever you want. Every one of us has divine providence divine choreography that defines our lives. So this makes the plot thicken, because to go back to the analogy I gave earlier, the analogy I gave was the surface of the sea conceals everything beneath it. So we know there's something beneath it, but you're living on the surface, and that enslaves you. But what happens if the surface is also part of the divine plan? To use Kabbalistic terminology, even the Tzimtzum, God's concealing his light is a divine act. Hein Gvurosav. This is God's power. Yes, it's true, it's a power of concealment, and it can deceive us into thinking that there's nothing there, but there's a very strong intention in that as well. So to go back to the astronaut analogy as well, the astronauts are sent to this outer space. We're sent to this outer space called life on Earth, an alien environment. The soul does not understand this world. That's why it's terrified to come here. It has to be forced to come to this world. It doesn't understand people who sit in restaurants all day and eat. Souls don't eat. It doesn't understand people who go on cruises just to go around in a circle and come back to where it started. It understands you want to go somewhere. Okay, let's take a trip. What's the point of just paying several $1,000s to come back to where you began? Okay, it's true there's a lot of pleasure in the journey. So the soul has a lot of challenges, difficulties understanding that what we consider to be important. And yet it comes to this earth, but it knows that there's a purpose. So even the shallowness of life is a purpose, because it's the way God created a stage that conceals what is beneath the surface. And that's what the soul is energized by. It knows it's difficult, but it knows my job is to pierce the surface. So think of it this way. If you're living a life that you think is mundane and the routine traps you, look at that itself as the purpose for you to not allow it to trap you. So it would be one thing if, as I said, the surface of our lives just controls us. And how are you going to go dig deeper? It's like someone says there's a treasure 10 miles under your home, but I don't got the tools and the money to dig that far, and I have the time to dig because I have a job to go to tomorrow. But if you're told that this is the purpose of your life, is to live on the outer level, do your work, and slowly start digging, it's a whole different approach, because then it's not like, for example, some of the Far Eastern thinking is that mundane life is a contradiction to the spiritual journey. And simple as that. If you really want to be spiritual, you're going to have to give up that world. Judaism does not say that at all. As a matter of fact, only the Kohanim and the Levites were the only ones that did not have private property. They didn't own land in Israel. But everyone else did. There were people who dedicated their lives to study, to service, and so on. But the majority, like the Talmud says, many people tried to be like Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who will soon celebrate Lag Bomer, which was his life was complete Torah. Torah was Teirasa and Manasseh. His whole life was completely connected like a fish in the sea. Interesting, the same analogy. Nuna Yam, a fish in the sea. A fish in the sea sees the whole glory of what's going on under the surface. Some souls have earned that right, or just are blessed, or maybe it's not such a blessing because they don't have the challenges. Fish in the sea. Fish in the sea never leaves the sea. That's its world. It's always connected. But the rest of us, most souls, are land souls. Moses, by the way, was another water soul. Min Hamayim Mishasiu. He was drawn out of water. But most of us are land mammals, land souls. And the land soul, even though it may not have that initial spiritual connection, but it has much greater strengths because it has much greater challenges. Here we live on dry, arid land, disconnected from the source. We live on the surface, and we sometimes don't even know there's something underneath. But when you discover that's your purpose, and discover there's purpose in the fact that you are living in a life that has been concealed, that the insides have been concealed, that itself elevates life. So then the challenge is, how do you find in that 90-mile-an-hour life that you live, I'm just using that speed, and whatever it may be, how do you find within that the deeper purpose? So now you have not something that is just an impediment, it actually happens to be also an asset. Now I'm not saying it's easy, but then the question has to be asked, okay, Passover is over, hangover, what do we do now? Well, you go back to your work. No one says you should quit your job just because you had a very deep transcendent experience. But now the question is, how does that transcendence spill over into your job? Just like that laundromat, how is your job perhaps a reflection of something deeper? And that's challenging. It's easier to see it, of course, in a person who goes into the Holy of Holies, a priest, a high priest. But someone who's just doing menial labor, or whatever work it is, where's the divine providence in that? And it's definitely there. So here is where the surface can be an impediment if you just let it control you, or it's asking yourself every day, how can I, using Kabbalistic terms, redeem the sparks of my work today, of my activities today, and even of my pains and anxieties? Because you see, people are haunted, let's go to that for a moment, by psychological ghosts. It's not just an enemy. There's also power in that, positive power. For example, you can empathize with someone who's been in that situation. One of the pieces of advice in Jewish thought, in any situation where you have, in some way, as I mentioned, failed, or somewhere have had setbacks, or some of your own fears, is that you have the power to help other people in that situation because you have the credibility and unique, intimate knowledge that someone who's never gone through that can never experience. So even knowing that means, not that it justifies that you had to go through it, but it gives you keen insight. It gives you the ability to be able to empathize, as I said, and relate to someone who's been in that situation. But that again requires you to get beyond just about me and my discomfort. Now that I've gone through it, I'm in a position to help someone else who's been there. I don't remember the exact Talmudic metaphor, but there's a story, similar story, to a person who lived a criminal life. And he knew all the ins and outs, all the intricate roads everywhere, because he used them to hijack and to mug and to people who were traveling. And when he finally came to discover did his own tshuva and came to discover his path, he would stand in these roads and warn people because he knew where they shouldn't go. He dedicated part of his life to help people. Now this, of course, on a physical level, but also psychological. He understood the pitfalls. He understood where the dangers were. And he did it not in a way that was obvious. He did it in a subtle way because he understood a certain dark side that other people didn't understand. So you have many stories like this. This is a person who redeemed in a way. It doesn't justify what happened. It's after the fact. But it shows that you can, even on things that may be negative, they also become part of the process of accessing deeper strength. So this person took the years of his experience in the negative and turned it into something very positive. There's even a more blatant analogy used in the Talmud with a prostitute, actually. And the expression in the Talmud is that the pillows that she once offered in sin, she later offered in mitzvah, because she ultimately married a great sage. And she did her process of tshuva. I mean, the Talmud doesn't mince words. It uses sometimes very graphic language. But that's the language it uses. That everything has in its sparks of power. As much as we may associate prostitution to very negative things, but there is sexuality in there. Sexuality has sparks of holiness. It's not a type of justification. It just means that no person is not redeemable. And that a person can learn from what they have experienced to do things later in a very powerful way in holiness. And there's a lot of examples of how one channels these type of things. It's not simple always. Some things are very difficult, and it's not about redeeming and suggesting that you can maintain your past life. It requires obviously changing your life, but certain intuitions, certain wisdom, certain experience, and so on can be turned into positives. And this too is accessing deeper strengths within ourselves. So in the final equation of things, the real challenge, and this of course is a lifetime of work, and that's why we have the spheres to Omer, the counting of the Omer every day, refining ourselves. It's ultimately looking and recognizing, as I said earlier to sum up, that you have unbelievable, enormous, infinite reservoirs of power. That's number one. Just like that which is beneath the sea. Number two, that you have, yes, a surface level that blocks it, that conceals it. Number three is that even that surface level is also part of the divine providence. I don't know if that's number three. Number three was the heat and the pressure, how you access the deeper strengths. But it also includes not denying or escaping your surface life, but also making it part of the journey. Now, how to do this specifically, obviously, is not in the scope of this discussion here, because you really need to sit down with someone. They can then look at your specific life and say, okay, here's my surface. Here are potential strengths I have. How can I map out a plan? That's what you guys have to do. I can give you some direction, and I can perhaps help you with doing this, but now comes the final step, which is difficult to do in a group, because every one of us has a different story. Everyone has a different surface life. Every one of us is traveling at different miles per hour. We have different ghosts and different challenges and anxieties, and even deeper, and also different strengths, inner strengths. But the person committed and knowing that they are an astronaut on a mission, and knowing that they are ready to commit to that with the proper pressure and proper love and warmth, they can ultimately both uncover the surface and even make the surface of your life deeper and more meaningful, and find deeper strengths in that as well. And I've seen it countless times. Just to use one example on a very basic level, a businessman that came to this class many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, very prominent businessman in New York, and he's known as pretty much of a shark, tough guy. And he came to thank me. That's why he came to the class. He thanked me because my book, Toward a Meaningful Life, changed his life. Well, he had a compartmentalized life, as he put it. He said he had a good family. With his family, he was this. But in business, he was a very tough guy and not liked at all. I'm not even getting into ethical or unethical. I don't think he was unethical, but he was a tough guy. And he said that the book taught him that you have to integrate your life. You have to integrate your family life, your soul with your body. Your work can't just be outside of the picture. Like you only have God on Shabbos, and when you're with your family on vacation, it has to be part of all of your life. And what he came up with was, since the book had such an impact on him, Toward a Meaningful Life, he started purchasing cases of these books and had them in his business office. The board is his main office, and he was a big executive. At every meeting, at the end of the meeting, he would give a book to the people there. And based on one of the suggestions in the book, he also had a charity box on his office desk, and everyone was giving charity. Not about, it wasn't the amounts, and it was very shocking. First of all, people thought he had went off his mind a bit, like he became some type of reborn whatever. But then, after a while, people saw, he was the same guy. He was just introducing another element. And he told me specifically, he said, not only did it not undermine his business, it enhanced it. He started creating trusting relationships with people. People opened up in ways they would never have opened. And so did he. Because it wasn't just a business deal, two businessmen. It became, you're a human being. You have feelings. You have faith. You have this. You have that. And then people started asking questions. And he told me it was a transformation of his entire life, including his home life and everything else. And it wasn't because he was in a crisis. He just read it, and he liked the idea, and he realized that it's important. So here's an example. And his work, even though he continued to make money, his work became a completely different type of dimension. He saw his work. He said he was more excited many times, he said, to give the guy the book than to make the deal with him. He just felt like introducing a little soul into such a tough business world, he felt was like fulfilling something. He felt he was piercing and breaking the hold of money and economy and so on. And again, it wasn't because he suddenly became a saint and became a Torah scholar and praying all day. He remained a businessman. And some people probably still see him as a shark. And I'm sure he's not easy. I tried asking for money a few times. That's how I know. I hope he's listening. So, no, my point being is that, I say that as a tribute to him. That he didn't suddenly become a tzaddik. Same person, but he changed his life. So it means it's not so terrifying. It could be the same person, but you introduce something. Another dimension was introduced, which didn't compromise the outer dimension, the surface level. Now, I'm not saying it's as easy and in every situation it will work, etc., etc. Life is complicated. But the idea is that it's possible. And once it's possible, it changes the equation. So here we are, the day after Pesach. And Pesach means transcendence, to go over, pass over, to jump over, and transcend. But the challenge now is today, what we do today. You know, and the Hayom Yom is a interesting book written by the Rebbe. It's really a compilation of Hasidic sayings for each day of the year. So the Hayom Yom of today's day talks about that yesterday is connected to the Mashiach. The Baal Shem Tov actually had a custom at the end of the last day of Passover to have a Mashiach's Suda, a Mashiach's banquet, which was like a taste of Messianic times, which is similar to the theme of the Haftorah about the future of the world, a world of peace. And he says in today's Yom Yom, he says that now the challenge is to bring that Messianic vision into the daily routine. That's the challenge. It's one thing to have a vision when you're, in synagogue or you're sitting around family, celebrating, singing. But to go back into the rat race and still maintain the vision of reaching a higher place, that, of course, is much more challenging, but also much more gratifying, because that's the purpose of it all. Most of the days of the years are not Shabbos and not holidays, because those are days that are somewhat of an oasis, helping us to recharge ourselves, to be able to then bring that power into the daily lives. So that's why this day is a key day in a way, because it's like a bridge called Isru Chag. It means bound to the holiday, Isru Chag, Ba'avesim, bound to the holiday with like ropes. It's an expression in Tanakh. So it's a day that's still in the shadow in a way. It's still an extension of the holiday. It's not the holiday, but the energy of the holiday is still with us. But it's a bridge because it's a work day and it's a regular day in a sense, and it begins a new journey hopefully empowered by everything that Passover brought. And that's why, we begin to eat chametz, as they call it, bread. There's not a sin to eat bread, only the 8 days of Passover, because bread is very much part of life. But once you're empowered by the bittul and humility and pressure, Passover is a very pressurized day. If anyone had to clean their kitchen and knows, and a lot of heat in the kitchen too, and so on. But that type of pressure then leads us into days where you no longer have to eat matzah. And now you go back to the regular routines of eating a meal, but hopefully eating them with a different spirit. Not just, 8 days passed, now we're back to square one, as if Passover never happened. That's not exactly the intention. That's why in the Chabad Haggadah, at the end of the Seder, in some Haggadahs it says, Chasal Siddur Pesach, and with this we conclude the order of Passover. So the Ater Rebbe, Rav Shneur Zalman, when he compiled his Haggadah, he took out that line that we conclude Passover, because he felt that the energy of Passover is never concluded. It's supposed to continue on even after the Seder and after Passover. So with that said, I want to wish you all, and everyone, the web audience as well, that we should maintain the power and recognize as we go into the more concealed dimensions of our lives that too is part of the plan, and learn to pierce the surface by recognizing that. And God should bless us all with the strength to actually dig deep and achieve great things with the potential that we have, enormous potential. For me, for some reason, maybe I'm wired that way, or maybe this is my mission. I always felt in my mission to help other people discover their mission. Thereby, I don't have to worry about my mission. No, that's just a joke. That is the mission. So, I always feel great. There's nothing. I'm sure all of us would feel the same way. You care about somebody, and you see potential they have, and you in some way help them have confidence in it and the courage to access it, and then you see them shine. I think it's one of the greatest pleasures in life. So I was blessed to see many people in that fashion, and hopefully more. And I think we could all do it for each other. You can help me as well in the same way. So it's a great, that alone is something, to have kindred spirits and a certain camaraderie of people dedicated to helping other people just actualize their great potential. So you should all shine with a special light and voice and music that is unique to each of you, and thereby not just changing the world in some way, but also helping other people shine in a ad infinitum, like a flame lighting a flame, lighting a flame, lighting a flame. That's the mission of the Meaningful Life Center, and hopefully we've achieved it to some extent, but there's a lot more to go. There's 6 billion people out there. So hopefully we're all partners in this. And I want to renew my commitment as we enter, like in a way, in a new year. After Passover is also somewhat of a new year. The new year of a new order of miracles and higher transcendence. And I am honored to be part of your lives and hope you feel the same. And I say this to everyone, both live and also as this will be archived, those that will hear this later. So it has a delay action effect, in a positive way. And if this can go viral in a good way, hey, it's talk about nuclear fission. It's a chain reaction that has a domino effect, a ripple effect that can change the entire course of history. And we could all say that we were here when it started. And so thank you very much. Yeah. Let me again dedicate the class. The class was dedicated to the birthday of Asya Bat Sarah. And may she have many healthy years, together with dear husband and Mark and family. And if anybody's interested in dedicating a class, which is both dedicated here live, on location here as well as online, please contact me. As well as if you're interested in that book I mentioned, The Counting of the Omer, it's easy to access online as well, right on our website, meaningfullife.com. And the final announcement is about Philip. Philip's weekly class, 7 p.m. Thursday, resumes tomorrow night. And for more information about it, just email philip@meaningfullife.com for location and details. And I highly recommend it. And we will continue next Wednesday, as usual. And if you're not receiving our weekly emails, just send us an email as well on meaningfullife.com. We can keep you posted of events and any changes or the titles of these classes, as well as the weekly essays that I write every week. Did I cover it all? Okay. So thank you again, everybody, and have a very great week, a transcendent life. Thank you.